Hi, everybody. Welcome to Geek the F Out. I wonder what we're going to talk about today. Ridiculousness of... I don't know if this was absolute lack of foresight and naivety or if it was absolute genius.
It was genius.
In marketing.
It was genius in marketing. Also, mine is full of popcorn.
Mine is empty.
If I were them, I would say like claim genius, because how do you not, like, otherwise, if you're going to claim, oh, we had no idea, you're real dense or your world is really small.
I was also surprised that this is a metal bucket. Like,
yeah.
I did not expect it to be metal. I thought it was going to be plastic. This is plastic and this is silicone, but the bucket itself is
like
metal.
They originally did the bucket and then they were like, no, we should do something else. They're like, why don't we just like make people stick their hand in the worm's pussy?
It was also weird because this came out and was available in the theaters like 2 weeks before the movie released, which was really odd. And I think you might be onto something because this was packaged separately in a like plastic bag, completely enclosed, where this was just all the buckets were just like stacked with like tissue paper inside to keep them from scratching while they were stacked. Yeah. But otherwise they were like separate items that just came together.
So I think the beginning of this stream, the last 2 minutes, is a perfect example that yes, it is in fact genius, because essentially
we talked about it.
Yeah, we're talking about this thing before even talking about the movie, and that's exactly what happened on the internet, right?
Yeah, and they had videos of the actors and everybody like talking about how ridiculous the bucket was.
I haven't seen that.
So, yeah, there were like reels and stuff posted to Instagram where they were interviewing cast members about what they thought about the meme of the popcorn bucket.
So funny. Because I mean, someone clearly, I don't know. Like, it is like cool, but as someone who collects popcorn buckets, I don't know. It seemed like I said, like they thought of this first and then they're like, oh, let's put something in there. Let's do something with that.
Well, that's the end of the stream. Thank you. We just wanted to talk about the Dune popcorn bucket. Hope you had a good time, folks. What are we talking about tonight?
Hi, I'm Kayla Johnny, everybody. How are you?
I'm Kayla, and we're joined by our esteemed guest, Mr. Brick Something.
Hi.
Welcome.
Frequent collaborator.
Yes. Bless the maker.
Bless the maker. But yeah, so we're here to talk about Dune Part 2. Yes. Before we get into it, we'll go around, say, what are levels of the Dune universe, like how into the universe we are or not. Johnny, you want to start? The Duneverse.
Sure. The first thing I did with Dune was play the board game, actually.
Oh.
Which is kind of fun. Oh, you know what else we should do? We should say hi to the chat, but there's not many here. There's Brick and Eldor and Duchess. Hi, thanks for being here.
Smack that like, smack that subscribe, smack that bell icon.
we have a lot of competition tonight. Gotham City Tonight's going on, and Holdo Maneuvers talking about their March Madness. But so thanks for being here, stopping in. I played the Dune board game first. I believe my roommate was in the midst of reading the novels and was going down the Dune rabbit hole. This was before the first movie came out.
They went down the hole.
And he got the board game, and we've played it a couple of times. It's one of those games that is best with 6 players, and sometimes it's hard to get 6 people who want to actually play the Dune board game.
Can I ask about it? I don't know much about it. Because is it what era is it? Is it based on like the books? Is it based on any of the movies or?
I it's based on the books.
Okay. So it's not like tied to the Lynch film or.
No.
Okay. Got it.
Here,
It's its own standalone thing.
I will do this.
Yeah, I'm a visual person.
Where's the okay?
Yeah, I didn't even know there was a game.
Ooh, look at that cover art.
Yeah, that's the newest
Mm.
version of the game. And it has
Gotcha. Okay.
so it has character cards, and like you have to take over sections of Arrakis. I wish I had there was a
Is it like Settlers of Catan?
No.
I say that like I've played the game. I haven't. I just kind of know the premise.
There's a turn tracker, and there's like 12 turns, and I forget. It's been so long since we played now. I forget what the rule for winning is. But each of you plays a house. A house, but like Bene Gesserit, Fremen, Atreides, Harkonnen. I don't know how you say it. I think it's Harkonnen is how they say it.
I saw it.
It depends on it depends. Like there's
depends on the iteration.
Yeah, and I think Herbert did print or create a pronunciation guide, but like it's been Harkonnen, it's been Harkonnen, but in this current Villeneuve, Harkonnen.
But you can see here too, like
a thing that said he created that pronunciation guide, but then he also said that you can pronounce it however you want. So continue. Yeah. Sorry, Johnny.
You can see here, like you can go to war over areas of Arrakis to control, and you can see like you have leaders, like there's Baron Harkonnen and there's Gianni. And there's weird rules too. So like whoever's playing the Bene Gesserit at the beginning of the game, they can predict who's going to win the game. And if the person that they predict wins the game, the Bene Gesserit player actually wins the game.
Ah, that's cute.
And there's, I forget which house it is, but there's only one that's allowed to actually take notes that's going on during gameplay. Nobody else is allowed to keep notes.
Was it like
because there's certain times? Yeah, there's certain times you can look at other players' hands and things like that, and if you're not that particular house, you have to remember it. Otherwise, that particular player can write it down.
That's cute. I see what they did there.
But it's one of those games where it feels like it's best with 6 players, which is the max, and it's not often you get an actual 6 players to play it. But yeah, that was the first thing that I did, and then my roommate was reading the books and was really, like I said, going down the rabbit hole of Dune lore and was telling me all about it. And then I've seen the movies. I haven't read any of the books myself. I like the movies fine. I don't intend on reading the books. For reasons we'll probably get into when we get deeper into the discussion. But yeah. So Kayla, how about you?
That's fair. I am in the middle of these two, where I read the book in high school, the first book in high school for one of my classes, and I don't really remember. I think I liked it. I don't remember being like obsessed with it or anything like that, like I have been with other series. And then I re-listened to it when Dune Part 1 came out in 2021 and loved the movie. I just like loved the style of the movie and just like the intensity, just these very cinematic shots that were, it was like every scene was very big. And I loved that. And like it was just really good. And I felt like it was similar enough to the book. And then, yeah, I re-listened to it again right before this movie came out. And yeah, spoiler alert, but love this movie. But it's like a separate entity than part 2 of the book, at least, for sure.
Actually,
it took some liberties.
You know
Oh,
what? There's
yeah.
something I forgot to mention. I've seen the David Lynch Dune movie,
Okay.
but it was years and years ago, and I don't think I actually understood what it was. Like, I had no idea that it was based on a book or anything like that. It's one of those things, because that came out in what, like 1984?
Yeah.
It might have
I
been
don't
one of
know
those
if I've
ones.
seen it. We might have
might have been-
watched it in my class.
It might have been one of those things where, like, I caught it on the Sci-Fi Channel in like the early 90s when I was like 10 years old, 11 years old, and had no idea what I was watching. Long enough ago that I forgot basically everything about it, except that Patrick Stewart's in it. And Sting.
Patty Stew.
Not the wrestler Sting. The musician Sting.
Hell yeah.
Sorry. Anyway, continue.
That was pretty much it.
So can I clarify?
I'm excited to talk about it.
I didn't put 2 and 2 together till you said I read it in high school, and I just assumed like while I was in high school, and then you said our teacher showed it to the movie. So you read it as an assigned
I don't know if
book.
Yeah, it was a signed book. I took a sci-fi fantasy class.
Oh,
in
wait.
our senior year of
you
high
have
school.
a sci-fi fantasy class in your high school?
Yeah, in high school? What the kind of high school did you go to?
Damn. Okay, got it.
Catholic
Cool.
school. Well, senior
I
year,
went to
you got-
private Catholic school. We didn't have anything that cool, but okay.
Well,
anyway.
senior year, the first half, it was like a regular English class, and then the
Okay.
second semester, we got to choose which one we got to do. So there was like sci-fi. There was
awesome.
like, I forget the other categories. There was a bunch of other categories, but yeah, of course, I went for the sci-fi because it's me.
'Cause when I
Yeah,
was in high
but
school,
it was
English,
mostly sci-fi.
we had to read The Scarlet Letter and Animal Farm. Like,
Yep.
not
Oh,
Dune.
I read the Scarlet Letter freshman year. Once again, no, sophomore year was Scarlet Letter. Freshman year
Kill a
was Handmaid's
Mockingbird.
Tale. And To Kill a Mockingbird, which once again, Catholic school,
Yeah.
and we were reading those.
The geekiest book I got to read in high school as part of the curriculum was The Hobbit. The coolest
Lucky.
book was Siddhartha. And maybe Catcher in the Rye. I don't know. Anyway.
Sit off.
Okay, Brick, your turn.
Yeah.
Geek
For
out.
me,
Let's
okay,
go.
Dune. So I will say the first experience I ever had with Dune was on VHS of the David Lynch. No, actually no. Alan Smithy. Because David Lynch didn't even like the movie that was released. So he had his name removed. Like he had gone to war with the Emperor. No, gone to war with the studio, so much so that like the cut that they wanted to release in the theater, he was just like, nope, take my name off that. And then many moons later, he finally did get a director's cut that he felt good about and put his name back on. So that was my first sort of like understanding of what Dune was. I remember seeing the advertising kids, but we didn't see it in theaters, and just being intrigued by what I was seeing on the screen, like people in these cool suits in the desert, right? It's not like, oh, they're in space. And so I was just intrigued by the visuals of it all, which is honestly the best part of that film from my perspective as a Dune fan, because it's an adaptation that definitely takes liberties with the books, but not in ways that I think like does a good job of honoring what's really in the books. So more on that later. And then I tried to read the books once in high school, and you did much better than me, homie, because I couldn't get through it. Granted, I had not truly read a book cover to cover until I was in college. Like I was good at skipping. I was good at moving along. Like, oh yeah, this sucks. Moving on. Like just skimming. Like not really like, okay, I'm into this. I'm reading it.
You were using the Cliff Notes.
I wasn't really I wasn't using the Cliff Notes, but I was just moving around a lot. And I think I was just into comic books and Saturday morning cartoons. And I was kind of like, oh, this is slow or like whatever. So that was always my way. So like when I said I read The Hobbit, I didn't read The Hobbit. I read sections of The Hobbit, moved along, whatever. Okay. College, I made an attempt because I was trying to read a lot more. One, I was getting more into reading and was trying to read a lot more literature, and just being a nerd, I was like, dude, I want to read this stuff. And that's when I got into Star Wars, the expanded universe stuff, while at the same time getting, and at one point challenging myself, hey, I want to go back to that book, Dune, because, and Lord of the Rings. And so I will say that I was like, holy crap, it's like two different worlds. And I'll get to maybe some little Star Wars / Dune conversation because they're very different. And I think that's when I started to realize, oh yeah, there's science fiction and then there's like science fantasy or fantasy in general. And they're like very two different approaches. And so anyway, that's that. Fast forward, I started reading the books, and it was a book that I got really into, and then went down that rabbit hole. Like I went to, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, and on. And I don't think I actually got to like Chapter House, the last couple of Frank Herbert novels, and God, oh my God, I'm blanking. What is it called? Something, whatever.
Pharaoh? God Pharaoh of Dune?
It's God something of Dune. But so this was like later.
God
I think that was like
Emperor.
God Emperor. It wasn't until like 2004, maybe. So anyway, like that, and what finally got me back to going to those was there was a sci-fi / BBC series called Dune, and then they continue with Children of Dune, which actually ended up having, what's his name, the X-Men, the second version of Charles Xavier, the
James
actor.
McAvoy?
Yes,
Yeah.
James McAvoy played Leto, the second. So spoiler alert, there is a child later named Leto the second, or Leto the second.
Yes.
And so anyways, I got really into that, and then went back and revisited I had reread Dune. I probably by that time like at least 4 times prior, and then got back into rereading them. And there was a period where I was just like all about it. And I think what resonated with me, what I loved so much is, so I'm a geek that's into a bunch of things, including Star Wars, and I love the adventure and the pulp. But I also it's the ideas of certain types of science fiction, like what they call hard science fiction. Some people like that really kind of explores the world that we live in, but through like a lens of scientific, I don't know, futurism maybe. But that's the thing with this, is that in theory, it still plays within the rules of physics. I know that sounds weird because you're like, well, what's the voice and what's all this space stuff? But it sort of tries to really be grounded in scientific principles. So like, I don't think most people realize, but like literally this is supposed to be our future of like our reality now writ large, like many, many, many like eons in the future. And so all the Bene Gesserit stuff, they don't talk about it in the movie at all, but like they follow what's called the Orange Catholic Bible. And there's this whole like appendix that's like talks about the Orange Catholic Bible was an attempt to reconcile ancient religious texts into a single universal thing. And it takes stuff from Hinduism and Buddhism and Catholicism and Christianity in general. So like all of that stuff fascinated me. And then on the other side of the fence, I'd be like, Star Wars, it has nothing. It's galaxy long time. Yeah, whatever. There's sound in space, and sometimes you can breathe in a meteor or whatever that is, an asteroid, and there's a monster inside that looks a lot like a dune worm, right? So like, but I love them all, and they're sort of different. So like when you guys are doing your Trek retrek stuff, just Star Trek to me has always sort of been more in the vein of like something like Dune, in the sense of like your science, and we're exploring themes in that way, versus say the more fantastic Star Wars, or I don't know, or hard fantasy. So like my brain, for some reason, there's something about Dune, and that kind of storytelling that fascinates me if it's done well. And there was just a lot of things about Dune that was like, ooh, made me be able to reflect on like history, religion, whatever, sociology, and I dig it. So I'll just put it at that. Oh, and then I will say, when the Villeneuve stuff came out, I was excited. But I was like, real like, ooh, are they gonna try this again? I don't know, but okay, let's see. Because I really am one of those people who believes that it's a tough nut to crack for movies, especially given like modern film like audiences. Like we want to see the MCU and have fun, and we want to see, like so I will say I was hesitant, but was pretty like surprised by the first one. But this one, I'm like, okay, I like this one even a lot more than I did the first one. So I'll leave it there.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. It's I will say so I've seen this movie twice now. The first time watching it, I knew this was going to happen because I had just literally finished re-listening to it like that day. I knew this was going to happen. I've done this with a lot of movies now where because I just re-listened to it, I was just like constantly comparing them the whole time instead of just sitting back and enjoying the movie. But I saw it a second time and I was like, okay, like let's just enjoy the movie for what it is. Someone else wants popcorn right now. And yeah, you want some? And I thought it was really good. But I was gonna comment on how you were talking about how there is a lot of aspects in it that are rooted in science, and it is interesting. Okay, you're gonna need to get off of me. It is interesting because I think if you weren't paying close enough attention, you would probably miss those things. And yeah, it's not talked about as much as it is in the book, I would say, but it's definitely still there, like how he was able to or both Jessica and Paul were able to transmute the water of life into something that's not poisonous, because it was poisonous and they made it not poisonous. And that's obviously not something we know how to do scientifically now within our own bodies. It is something we know how to do in a lab for some things, not everything. So it's interesting how that could be a possibility in the future, because there is already a lot of stuff that I've learned about through I've done like meditation classes and stuff, and there's a lot of stuff with how do I say this, like transcending kind of your mind to a point where you're able to like pinpoint, stuff that is hurting in your body, different diseases if you're sick, and like essentially be able to heal yourself. So like it's not that far off from ideas that we have today. But it's very interesting, especially because this was written in 1965. Like that blows my mind that he thought of all these ideas, especially because I don't know if it was mentioned in the movie, but essentially there was another holy war, but it was between like essentially AI and man, and that's why there's not computers or anything anymore now in Dune. And so I'm like, wow, okay, well, we're going that direction with AI and computers right now. So the
Butlerian jihad.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that's great to point out. So like I was just telling Ryan in the chat that like, yeah, he was saying that he'd read some of the prequel books that were then later written by the original author's son and Kevin J. Anderson, who was like a big Star Wars expanded universe author. But they fleshed a lot of that stuff out based on his notes. And yeah, that notion of that there was this war at some point in our future, Paul Atreides past, where essentially like the whole atomics thing comes into play, where like when did we ban those? And that essentially, yeah, computers and thinking machines, AI, robots, essentially revolted, because that's what they do, because humans suck. And so no, they did that, and then humans essentially, like, they won. And so there was humanity, like, lost that technology. And so to go back to what you're saying about what humans can do with the body and the mind and all of that, that's when that stuff gets ratcheted up. And before I jump to there, I just want to say, like, I'm with you. And at the time when I was reading it in college, I was also really just fascinated about, like, like martial artists, Shaolin monks. So, like, I was doing a lot of that stuff, and Buddhism and meditation. But it's true, there are parts of the world that have a different sort of understanding and training. And so there's people who are practitioners in things that can do things, not necessarily like, transform chemicals in their body, but like, I don't know, I can't stand on my head. Like, I can't burn things in my, there's things that I can't do. I can't do all of that. But I do know for a fact that people actually physically do that and, like, control pain and shove pins through their bodies. Like, and a lot of that has to do with your control of the mind. And I bring that up because that's basically the premise of the book. And you have to remember, this book was written in the 60s. So there was a lot of mind expansion through chemicals, and a lot of, especially here in the Bay Area, we had, such a, like, with the hippies and everything up here, particularly because around Berkeley was this, like, hotspot for a lot of folks from India, sort of like, that was kind of like a Indian enclave. And so there was a lot of mixing between, like, hippies and, like, folks looking at Krishna and Hinduism and Buddhism. And so transcendental meditation. So, like, that was kind of in the water when he was writing it, and in the conversation. And so, again, they do stuff with their minds, using the power of the mind and other things that I can't do. So now take the notion that we're no longer allowed to use a calculator. We're no longer used computers. So the idea is, like, well, we there's stuff that we're used to and doing, and that we have to figure out how to do. And so the idea is that the Bene Gesserit is one of these schools of thought, right? And so this is all stuff that's not necessarily in the movie, but the Bene Gesserit, like, they took it upon themselves to kind of, like, figure out, what do we need to do with humanity? And they kind of created their weird little eugenics, controlling the bloodline thing. Then you had the Mentats, who were Dr. Huey, with in the movies, he is the doctor that kind of worked with the Harkonnens to allow them in the first movie to come attack. Paul's
He's
doctor.
not a Mentat.
I'm sorry, Suk doctor. Sorry.
Oh, okay,
So
okay. I was gonna say that's
my bad.
Thufir Hawat.
Yes.
Which,
and
he's not even in the second movie.
Yeah, so there's Thufir Hawat, who's basically a thinking machine, and you see a lot of them in this movie planning out the Harkonnen, like, attacks, and they're all standing around looking at these screens. Well, that's because they don't have computers, and it's literally human beings who are processing the information and, like, almost like
They're human
chanting.
computers.
So, like, with all that stuff, it's like, I know it sounds out there, but we're talking, I don't even know the numbers, at hundreds of thousands of years in the future, humans no longer have computers, and they have, like, built these schools.
8,000?
Yeah, they've built essentially these schools and guilds and all this stuff that are hyper focused on developing human abilities, and sometimes through the use of chemicals, hence the spice, right?
Yeah.
Boom. All of that stuff was like, even just me geeking out, like, that stuff is fascinating. That's a fun trip down where science could go and the future could go. But then at the end of the day, it reflects back on the world we live in, of, like, people trying to figure out the mind body connection, people trying to control resources like spice, whether that's drugs or oil, right? And people going to war over it. And then, of course, all the political stuff that's very much like old feudal. Like, it's weird that humanity somehow goes back to kind of this weird feudal state where they're not nations, but they're houses, and there's an emperor. But then there's also the Chom Corporation, which, again, doesn't get mentioned much. So anyway, all of that to say, because none of this is in the film, right? Like,
yeah.
And yet, and maybe we can flesh it out a little more, I still like it because I still do think that they did a good job of adapting the books. So it's weird to say.
I think so too. we can get into that now, but it is very different. There's a lot of, I think, like I said earlier, part one was fairly similar to the book. They left out a couple scenes, but I think the stuff that they left out, not only now seeing part two, I was like, okay, that makes sense why they left it out, but also, they were either not necessary, and then they kind of also changed the order on some of the scenes. Like the first scene we have in the book is Paul and the Reverend Mother Bene Gesserit doing the Gom Jabbar test with him. And yeah, in the movie, it's like a few scenes into it. So it's stuff like that where it's kind of moved around. But for the most part, it's very similar. And then the second movie, though, I personally, I knew going into it, I was like, they better not do a talking baby, because we've seen how that goes when you have to have like young children, babies have human emotions or talking. My best example is Twilight. And it looks so bad, and it's hard to take serious. And especially because it had to be a 2-year-old, like very small. Like I think in the
kind of would have been rad,
19,
No, I just said it kind of would have been rad to see, though, to see him try. But yes, no, I agree. It could be weird.
I think it would have taken people out of it, because I think we're just like, we're close to getting there with our deep fake and de-aging technology, but I think I don't think we're quite there yet.
I mean, it worked with Roger Rabbit.
Pulled us out.
Sorry.
Anyways,
real quick on that, before we go to, are we caring about spoilers or no?
No.
Okay, fine.
No care of
just
spoilers,
folks. Just no. Okay, go. No, I just wanted to make sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'm glad they changed that. I'm glad they changed that. And another major change is that there's this obvious divide within the Fremen right off the bat, where you have their believers in there's so many names for Paul. Like
Muad'Dib,
not the Muad'Dib.
Mahdi. Oh, oh god, I was gonna say that's not the Kwisatz Haderach. The Fremen say the Lisan al-Gaib.
Lisan al-Gaib. Because they say the Lisan al-Gaib, and then the Bene Gesserit is the Kwisatz Haderach. It's so hard to say.
It is.
Which is interesting how they become one and the same, which I'm still kind of confused by. But it's one of those things where I'm like, that's not like the point of it. So I'm just gonna kind of not gonna focus on it. But anyways, it's so there's this divide between them where Chani is not on the side of the believers, and it's very different than the book, where she just automatically believes in him from the beginning. And then of course at the end of the book, she's like, oh, you're going in a bad direction, like this isn't good. But early on she recognizes it in the movie, that because she's already not a believer of this religion, that she's not on his side, essentially. Even though she's with him, she just, doesn't go the same direction as the book. That was another big difference.
Yes, like it's funny.
I thought it worked. I thought it worked.
I guess that's my broader question, to kind of bring it back to the movie a little bit. And so, Johnny, you haven't read the books. I am still like, okay, so back up. Friday, I went to see it by myself. Had a blast. Went back Saturday with a friend who also only knows the movies. And so after, we just sat in the theater lobby, and I was just asking him, so tell me what you got it. Do you like it or whatever? He liked it. And I was like, and I kind of just, what I wanted to know was what people are getting without knowing the books, because there's a lot that like I was like, oh, I see what they're doing there, and I am informed by the book, so I can't separate myself necessarily. And so I have just wondered, are people like what Kayla just described? Like, I started thinking about this and was fascinated by the Lisan al-Gaib and the Kwisatz Haderach, and then I had to tell myself, it's not about that. Don't worry about it. Don't try and figure it out. Move on. I'm curious, are there things like that like, was there anything that you got tripped up on and you're like, I don't understand this, or felt like you were missing stuff because you didn't read? Or does it work as a sort of standalone thing?
I think it worked on its own. I don't think that there was anything that really tripped me up. Like I said, I had a little bit of a primer almost because of playing the Dune board game and my roommate telling me about, the Spacing Guild and Spice and Mentats and Bene Gesserit and Kwisatz Haderach, Knick Knack Paddywhack, Kwisatz Haderach. That's
give a dog a bone.
Exactly.
Say that 10 times fast.
But yeah, I don't think that there was anything that really tripped me up or that I didn't get, having not read the books.
Yeah, I think they definitely kind of simplified it down for sure.
So my perception of the movies as a whole, they were well executed. These were well executed versions of a story I've seen 100 times.
Oh,
but I recognize that the reason I'm so familiar with this is because Dune, the novel, inspired a lot of things that follow this story progression.
For sure.
Right. I just haven't read Dune.
I love that statement. And again, not putting you on the spot, I just want to understand a little bit more. When you say, I've seen the story a bunch of times, what is that story, if you had to distill it?
So the prophesized outsider comes in and saves these people from oppressive forces.
Mm-hmm.
To distill it down to its most.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I agree. That's a fairly like known, almost like trope, like storytelling trope. And so that's to me is the very much like the Star Wars. So to go to like the pulpy, and again, I'm not trying to diss it. I love Star Wars, just in a different way. But so Star Wars, Lucas essentially, like, he studied the whole, what is it? The something with the
hero's journey.
The hero's journey, something a thousand faces.
Yeah.
What's his name? So like this notion that you can universalize, I'm forgetting dude's name who did all that work, but that you could simplify all human stories, especially old ancient myths, into like a journey, right? And that there is this idea of the hero's journey. But here, like, so I hear that particularly with what you described, 100%. We've seen this a bunch of times. What I appreciated about Dune, though, like the movie and the books, I think that's why I was like, whoa, when I finally like read it, and I was like, wow, there's a bunch of stuff here that's resonating with me. And the main thing being, as I think, like, I don't know, I was going to say good. So I'm not being snobby, but like, I would say like, I don't know, rich, I don't know, science fiction, is that it really explores these things, but it actually, there's no easy out. Like Star Wars, there's an easy out. There's good, there's evil. Luke has a journey. He has to go and everybody wins. Yay. Right. So the version of the story that you said, there's kind of like a simplified, like good ending. Yay. What I love about Dune and like really solid science fiction, like Star Trek in many ways, is that you're often challenged to be like, oh my God, I'm following the story. Kirk is awesome. And then there are times when you're like, holy crap, Kirk is an idiot. And like, you have to struggle with that. And you have to think about things in the and sort of the implications. It's always like putting a mirror to like the world that we live in rather than an escape that I think sometimes science, like fantasy, is often, right? Go for it.
So I think one of the biggest things that did catch me by surprise was I did not realize until watching this second movie that the Fremen aren't from Arrakis. Like, it's not their planet either. Like, they're not originally from there. Like, this whole time I'm thinking the story is like they're the native people of that planet, but they're not. They don't have any more right to that place than anybody else does. Because they're not originally from there either.
So
because they play it off like this is their homeland, and like they like no one knows Dune / Arrakis better than the Fremen, and I'm thinking that's because, well, they're from there, of course. They're the people of that planet. No, they're not.
Well, it's tricky. Okay, so I was talking about this with my friend on Saturday night. And so much in the same way of like, we could talk about indigenous people, right? Much in the same way that like, I think certain people would say, well, like, oh, my family's indigenous to the Philippines. But actually they're not if you truly look at things in the cosmic epic scale of the like birthplace of Homo sapiens based on the fossil record. And we all, at least some of us, accept the facts. Sorry, shade. That the fossil record actually shows that we came out of Africa. Like our common ancestors all came out of Africa, and then we moved, right? So, and you know, and I say we, like throughout time, different places, for a long period of time, we moved out. So I think my read and understanding in the books, they call them the Zen Sunni wanderers. Like the Fremen are descended from what's called the Zen Sunni wanderers, who are nomads that move from planet to planet through space, like lived outside of the empire. And yes, there were Zen Sunni wanderers that landed in different parts of the galaxies, I think. Maybe
So
one
they're
out, I forget.
Not Geth, they're Quarians.
Sure. But at the end of the day, my understanding is that they were the first humans to be on Dune. So it's sort of like saying, well, people would say like, well, like Mesoamericans or whatever, the Mexica were indigenous to Mexico. Yes, but technically they all at one point were derived from folks who traveled the world. You know what I'm saying? So the question is like, where's the beginning point?
Yeah, I understand that. Like maybe I'm not looking at it symbolically enough, like not reading into it in that way. But like the examples you're citing, at least they're the same planet.
Right. And I think
like
that
those are all peoples from the planet Earth. The planet of Arrakis, from what I can understand, had no humanoid life on it at all.
That's it. Yeah, you're right. And I think, but then you could maybe just say continents. It's the same thing. A continent was a planet.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean. Like, to me, that's awesome writing for him to go like, I'm kind of just talking about, you know, this notion of like an indigenous people or whatever, but it's, I don't know. I just appreciate that about the writing and the premise. And so all of that to say is that I do think you're right in that it feels similar, but what I appreciated about it, about Dune, where to me, it's not the same story, in that in those stories that you described, you root for the chosen one and they're the good guy and they save the day. Right. And sort of more modern versions of that story might make you question, well, like, let's put it in sort of like, can this outsider like truly be the savior of these people? And then maybe there's a little bit of that. But in this one, I would say, yeah, he's the protagonist who we followed, Paul stories, but he ain't a good guy and he knows it. And that's why, like, as you follow this thing, actually the whole thing is about, I don't know, Frank Herbert never really clearly writes characters there's nobody who's like the heroic archetype. Like fans of He-Man would not be happy with Dune, in my opinion, right? Because He-Man needs to be good. Superman needs to be good all the time, right?
Yeah.
That's not
It's
how the
very
story
much
goes.
that it's not even anti-hero. It's just it's hero going to villain.
In my brain, it's human. Like, and I think that's why I always sort of described Dune as this real like humanist story, in the sense of like, yeah, there's people who can do crazy things, but it's all rooted in humanity's ability, at least written through science fiction. And like, and it talks about human tendencies that like, yeah, we can do all these cool things. Some of us can use spice to help us navigate through space. That's the Spicing Guild, right? Some of us can, you know, we have developed secret languages that we can like, or use our voice in a particular tone to compel people to do things. Like, so there's that. But at the end of the day, we're all warring over resources and trying to play one up against each other and screw each other over and pretend we're civil, but we're not. Like, and for me as a kid, and even as an older kid, older teen, early adult, that was fuel for this brain.
Yeah.
So I like, and all that to say is that I think the film did a good job of capturing that complexity and nuance that I was honestly surprised by. That's what I was worried about when they said they were going to do movies, because I'm like, who's going to watch this? Like, who's going to sit there and what's and you know, like, it's some weird heady stuff, and I just didn't know how it would take. And based on what I'm seeing, the box office and the reviews, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess it does work for a lot of people.
And I don't say that like the things like I've seen this story before and etc. Like, and even you talking about the Fremen and me being, oh, there's the Quarians, like the Mass Effect Quarians of the Fremen. Like I don't say to like
poo-poo it,
to like bring down Dune. Like there's obviously a reason those connections are made, because like you said, the book was written in the 60s.
Yeah.
Like it obviously inspired a lot of sci-fi that we have consumed from then until over the past, what? So did you say 65 was when it was published? So next year will be the 60th anniversary of Dune. So over the past 60 years, all the sci-fi that this has inspired, that's a testament to Herbert and his work. And how much inspired Dune? Like there has to be sci-fi that came before Dune that inspired Dune in certain ways as well.
Lord of the Rings.
And Lord of the Rings and fantasy and genre fiction, because he was like, oh yeah, this dude made up this whole reality about, like, you know, and so he was like, well, I'm going to do the same thing, but it's going to be interstellar and it's going to have as deep a lore. Like he started his story, but he in his brain started talking about the history of the Butlerian Jihad, like that, like a weird ancient history that he knew wasn't in the book. So it's and so that's where you get the Star Wars thing. Like that's, I think Lucas was seeing that and was inspired by it. So in his head, he had the Clone Wars, but didn't really talk about it, and that informed it. So like this is how I break down like Dune, Star Wars. I think Lucas very much saw what Dune was doing, saw some cool ideas, but was also very fascinated by like pulp stuff, Flash Gordon, right? While also being like into like, you know, Kurosawa films or Westerns or whatever. And he was like picking all these things, but at the end of the day, he wanted to make, as he said, like a kid's movie, like a fun adventure, pulpy thing. So I think in many ways I see the similarities and I see what the inspiration is, but they're two different animals, right? Intentionally. And so to go back, like that's why I was surprised that Villeneuve was able to take this thing and make it in a way that's beautiful, digestible for like people, while not ignoring the smarty stuff. It's all there, and I think people are digging it. And then there's just like, ooh, look at that cool helicopter. Ooh, look at giant worm. You know, like there's a spectacle. And so I'm just surprised that it's hitting. That's all. Like I'm surprised that it's taking off. But
and I think like we were saying, how it's kind of like a simplified version of the book, but like still hits on these really big ideas and concepts and themes. I'm thinking back about it now. I think I re-listened to the book after I saw Dune Part 1. Like I think after I saw it, I was like, oh, I need to know more about this. And I know this isn't the case for Johnny. You're not going to go read the book, but I think it's probably the same way with a lot of people where they're, you know, they're like, oh, I want to know more about this or more about that. And I still want to know more, although I've been told by a couple people not to read beyond the first book. So
there's a lot of, like, I've heard a lot of people, like, more than once say Dune Messiah is the best book. And that's, like, the next one.
Oh.
Right? Yeah. So there's people who think that the later books are better than the first one. And, like,
I've just heard that crazy.
I don't want to say, like, hands down, I'll never read the book or listen to the audiobook, but I'm just not watching the movies. I was satisfied with what I saw, and I was not like, oh my God, I got to go get the book and find out more about the actual story.
And I'll say that if you, I think that's why I'm kind of excited about it. If you only saw these films as a person who really appreciates and loved Dune, the premise of Dune or whatever, I think they made some changes that, in my opinion, again, this is 2024 Brick, I think are kind of improve on the original. So, I
Yeah,
know
I think
that's
it
weird
was.
to say, but
Yeah, I think it was good that Shawnee wasn't on his side, especially because she, you know, I don't know. Like I think when I just re-listened to the book again, they did mention that there were some Fremen that didn't believe, that weren't as religious,
that's yep.
and they're not focused on as much. But I think it is good to show that divide, and especially because I'm sure it was also to create more conflict. And it was like, it kind of sucked to see that there weren't more people that like spoke up about it. There kind of were, but then towards the end, I guess, because they went into the South where the fundamentalists are, that there weren't as many people to come forward and speak out against what was going on. But I liked that they did that with her. I don't think I liked it at first when I first watched it, because I'm like, oh, she was on his side from the beginning. Like, what the heck? Why is she so opposed to this direction he's going? But I think they were smart in doing that for sure with this movie. Go,
Yeah.
Johnny.
I just
Oh.
thought of two examples of things that I was thinking of. Like one, when he's like calling his first worm to ride it, and they're like,
That sounded hot, but yeah.
and I think it's Stilgar who says, "Get a big one," or Chani says, "Get a big one." I'm like,
Oh,
he's
it's
gonna
Johnny's friend. I forget her name.
Yeah.
Don't shame us. Get a big one. Call a big
Yeah,
one.
as soon as she said that too, I'm like, well, he's gonna get the biggest worm they've ever seen, and fuck if he didn't, because Stilgar was
Grandfather
like, not
worm.
one that big. And then one of the things that I'm like, oh, I've seen this like a million times before. At the very end, when he says to Chani, just remember that I love you, or I'll always love you, or whatever. And then he says, I'm gonna marry the Emperor's daughter, and we see Chani look all pissed off and shocked. I'm like, well, I've seen this before. Like, that was one of the things where I'm like, this is not new. This.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes.
It's different in the book.
That doesn't make it bad. I'm
No,
just
no,
saying.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Sorry. And
It's-
I heard you, and I didn't mean to imply that you were like poo-pooing Dune at all. No. And yeah, it's funny. Adam and I do this all the time with AWOC, where we're talking about like, this reminds you of Thundercats. It's not to like take away from AWOC.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. But there's a ton of changes in the book. So this is a perfect example. Chani, when I said that, like, I think there are things that they did that improve the books, for me, and maybe it's because my brain has changed and times have changed, Chani's like awesome in this book. Chani and her friends, and that what you pointed out, Kayla, in the books, it's not so much that there weren't people who were as religious but there were people who definitely didn't believe that he was actually thing. But in this case,
but they were definitely in the minority.
Right, but they were religious. They just didn't necessarily believe, like, so there's all of that piece. But in this one, we really got to see like this notion of the younger sort of generation who have been stuck and like frustrated by these Harkonnen oppressors, and like they believe in a free Arrakis, and they believe maybe in the vision of transforming Arrakis into a Dune. On the one hand, you've got the people who are definitely more like buying into the religious prophecy and like all of that, like Stilgar and the folks from the South. And then I love that we got to see that lens of like these younger fighters who have been like, we're in it, we're fighting. And now you're going to tell me just because like you've heard these prophecies that this outsider is now this, like, this is just another, like, that's the thing that bothered me about the books is like, even as a kid, I was like, why are they buying into this? Like, I know that this was seeded in there. So like another great thing that Frank Herbert did was like talk about this notion of prophecy, and like, here is a group who understands the power of religion and faith in the Bene Gesserit so much that they were like going around to different planets where humans were and seeding in things that would happen. Part of it was to seed in the idea that they would bring this Messiah, and like all this whole time they've been engaged in this multi-generational project to control bloodlines to produce a Messiah. So like they're getting people ready. And then on the other note that they talk a lot about in this movie is that they did this intentionally, not just for that, but also to just in case any of us, Bene Gesserit, find ourselves on some random planet someday, so that we could take advantage of it and make sure that we're safe. Like to me as a kid, I was like, whoa, that's wild. Who was like, I mentioned, were we live already when we were talking about being in Catholic school? Yeah, we were. Like I was heavily raised in that stuff. And I was at that age where I was just like trying to understand things for myself. And that hit hard of just like, oh yeah, there's like history and like, anyway. So, I don't know that stuff, the notion that we would actually see a Chani and her friends who are like, it's not even about religion versus not, that's not what it is. What it is like, we just want to see ourselves free.
Mhm.
We don't want to jeopardize the possibility of us being free and getting rid of the Harkonnen and just like turn to like another family who's going to come and take over our planet and use the spice and sell it to the Emperor. Like, I love that because that actually isn't enough in the book. That perspective isn't enough in the book. And I've always kind of wondered like, a little bit of me when reading the books was like, oh, what a bunch of suckers. I can't believe they fell for that,
Yeah, am I remembering correctly that like one of the things they said was the Mahdi will be Fremen? Like that was one of their arguments against Paul, was that he was not Fremen and the Mahdi will be Fremen.
There were certain people that were saying that, yeah.
They just make him Fremen because he goes through and he learns their ways and rides the sandworm, and that makes him Fremen for some reason.
Well, that's Stilgar. He's like, but he will learn our ways. And that's the thing. He was also saying Stilgar. The right things. He was saying the right things because of the coaching of his mom, but also just like, I don't know. That's the thing that I really appreciated about even with Paul in this one. I just feel like he became more of a character than he did the first movie. Definitely. Or whatever. I just feel like he was more complicated.
Yeah, and it's interesting with Stilgar because it's funny, his comedic lines when I first watched it, I was like, oh, I don't like this. Like, I get that they're trying to show how no matter what Paul did, like Stilgar was gonna say he's the Lisan al-Gaib. Like no matter what he did, like he was still gonna say that. And I feel like when I watched it the second time, I'm like, oh, okay, like it's literally comedic that he can do whatever and he's still the Lisan al-Gaib. Like it's yeah. And then with Chani, I will say I felt like in the book she was kind of like a passive character. Like technically she was a Sayadina too. But not that in the movie because she's not religious.
Sayadina being like a female mother, another religious leader. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad that she was more active in the movie, literally and physically. Yeah, so I liked that change because, very tired of the passive women roles in movies. So it was nice that I was glad that they made that change.
Yeah, and I think I think a lot of people I've seen people talking about it and they've really pointed out a lot like, yeah, I think they had to do this because times have changed. And I think that's part of it. I agree. Like, oh, we don't want to, we want to have more women. We want to have more people of color, all of these sorts of things. I get it. But what I appreciate about this film is that they made those changes, but in ways that I think really still resonate with some of the themes that I think Frank Herbert was trying to explore. I think in new ways and different ways, but at the end of the day, like I think at the heart of that story, one of the main themes is this question of like power, control, and freedom of like what, how do you reconcile good heroism, I guess, and good intentions when it's ultimately like ends up like controlling, or if it's, I don't know, stuff like that notion of like, I don't know. I feel like if the themes of the book, Denis Villeneuve really sort of looked at it and was like, okay, we're going to make changes, but those changes still have to jibe with the ideas that Frank Herbert was exploring. And I think in many ways, what he was trying to communicate. Anyways, this is what I was saying before.
No.
It's like the conversations around Dune can get super heady, which is rad. And people in the chat, like Bastion, is like dropping all this stuff, and I love it. But I also, and I know we have limited time, I am kind of curious just to talk about like the movie of it all. Like, what did you think? Like, what do you think worked well? Everything from, like, you mentioned cinematography. I'm thinking cast. What are some things that stood out to you all?
I think it definitely built up a lot more than the first movie. It's funny because usually it's kind of the opposite. Like the first movie is built up, there's a lot of exposition, there's a climax, whereas the first movie was just like hit after hit after hit. Like there was just like so much like big events that were happening, or significant events, I guess. And you know, there's still a lot of significant events in this, but it definitely had more of a direction that it was going, at least. But so that was kind of like, it almost made me like, oh, okay, like let's take a step back, like let's slow down, let's like build up this. I mean, essentially it was like building Paul's character all over again. And like you said before, like his characters and the acting and everything was just so much better in this movie. But yeah, I forgot where I was going with that. I got distracted. No, I don't know. I liked that aspect of it. Once, especially, yeah, the second time seeing it, I was like, okay, so I know how this is gonna go. I can appreciate it for what it is. And yeah, it was, I kind of wish, the only thing I wish was the final like battle scene. I wish it was a little bit longer just because I like battle scenes. Like it was really good. Like how they did it was really good. It was visually stunning. Like everything else in the movie is very visually stunning.
Can you clarify real quick? Are you meaning the big like war battle scene or like the one-on-one fight?
The war battle scene.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. The one-on fight was good, and that's, you know, almost like it happened in the book. There was a few differences, but that was really good. That one-on-one fight was really cool. Johnny. Oh.
So the ending, like, obviously felt like there was a lot unresolved, and I'm sure there's reasons for that, and part of it is for a third movie. I thought everybody was great, except, and it's just, man, if you want me to take a character seriously, don't cast Christopher Walken. Like, I love Walken as much as the next guy, but he's Christopher Walken. Like, I don't see or hear, especially here, anybody else but Christopher Walken in this day and age. Because he's Walken.
I agree.
But Florence Pugh was, I didn't recognize her as first. She was great as the princess. I loved, one of my favorite parts was Paul's reuniting with Gurney. I thought that was great, that fight, and then them hugging when when Gurney realizes who it is. Trying to think of other standout parts. I think that's it. Like, I thought it was.
It was cool
movie.
to see Florence. That's something I just thought of. Because in the book, well, at least in the first book, I don't know about the rest of them, she just kind of has all these quotes at the beginning of most of the chapters. So it was cool to actually see her side and the Emperor's side. Like we know about things that they did in the book, but it was cool to see them throughout the movie. I kind of wish they had introduced Fade Rotha a little bit sooner in the movie, because it was like halfway through. And what?
Continue. No, just
Okay. And or yeah, because I was thinking about, I was like, why didn't they introduce him in like the first part one? But you know, I think it still worked. But it was interesting that they, even in this movie, I guess because it was like 2 hours and 45 minutes long, that it still worked, that he was like, you were able to tell that he was crazy halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. I just thought of that. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that I mean, there's a lot that I really enjoyed about this film. Clearly, like I was into it. But the casting for me, there are some great stuff. But I agree with Johnny on two things. Well, sorry, I agree with Johnny about Christopher Walken. Like it's hard to get away from the Christopher Walken, and I think that's both a fault of the casting, but also like he didn't have much to do, so it made it even harder to be like, I'm going to drop in. And I think, in fairness, in the books, like it's not that like the Emperor Shaddam has like, he's got stuff going on, but I think that like he's not, say, as fleshed out, obviously, as like the Harkonnen are, or the Harkonnen or whatever, or even the Bene Gesserit, Mahayim, the Reverend Mother, the original Reverend Mother, or Jessica. Like he kind of is a force there, which always made me wonder again if Lucas kind of took cues from that. It's like we talk about the Emperor, but we don't really see him. Anyway, but so I agree on that point. I will say, like, and I thought Florence Pugh was fantastic, but again, that's one of those things where they made a massive change that I think was for the better. I think we got to see not like this, you know, kind of like, she was definitely a little more simple, and the character Irulan, the daughter of the Emperor, and there's sort of like some things about her like connection to the Bene Gesserit that are different. But I really love that they showed her sort of narrating and kind of like trying to figure out what's been going on, and the idea that, like, you know, she's kind of both surprised that her father would necessarily have a as deep a role in the killing of the Atreides, and then later finding out like this is a little bit different too from the books, that the Bene Gesserit were sort of behind that, and that, you know, that anyway, that she the Reverend Mother kind of like put that in the Emperor's ear to kind of kill the Atreides. So it's sort of like, that's just another example where I think it was great character choices, but the acting, I really love Florence. Why does that sound weird to me? Pugh. That said, like, I don't know what's up with, like, I will say from the first movie, I wasn't totally bought into a lot of the acting in the first movie. And there's something that happened in this second movie that I just thought was a lot better. And I don't know. I just felt like, because Denis' first language isn't English. Yeah, I'll just give a general example that I saw it happen a lot. Like Denis Villeneuve's first language is not English, right? But I will say, like, all those scenes where it was like the made up language, because that's not a real language that the Fremen are using, are fantastic. Like, that is not a real language, but the weight behind what they're saying, and the cuts and the choices they made with some of the facial reactions, I just thought were like, whoa, good job. And the facial reactions, I heard somebody saying like, what's her name? Zendaya can't act. And I was like, I actually was kind of blown away by, again, like the facial reactions. Again, like there are several points in this movie where a character reacts to something, and I'm just like, yes, that feels right and communicates so much more. So I just feel like this film does a great job. Again, I don't know if this is because of the language barrier, but this director is really good at showing us stuff and not just let me tell you what's going on, exposition after. And so the problem with the first one, I think, is that they had to do a lot of exposition. Like, you don't get in, like, there's a lot that they have to sometimes just drop and explain. Oh, the Fremen spill suit is blah, blah, blah. You know, it's kind of like, but in this, all the buildup and the tension between like Chani, like you're mentioning earlier, and her like just not being into this notion of a messiah, but then having the complicated like developing those feelings for him too, and kind of being like, oh, there's something different about this guy. Like none of that felt super cheesy to me. I kind of just went with it, and I don't know, and I think it's because of the acting. So anyway, I loved that, and even Chalamet I thought was just a lot better. I didn't buy him in the first one. So.
Yeah, he was like, he's a good actor, but I feel like he really came into the character in the second movie for sure. Also real quick, I don't think it was North and South religious groups. It was just where people were located. Like the people in the South just tended to be more fundamentalist. Like they weren't all one religion, and the North wasn't a religion. At least that's how I understood it. Yeah.
I had a hard time. I just watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, the live action, and the animated,
my God.
and I'm watching Legend of Korra now. So when they were talking about the North and the South Fremen, I had a hard time not thinking of like the North and the South water tribes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you were going in a different place. Because you're blowing my mind, because the entire time I was talking about exposition and show versus tell, I actually was thinking about Avatar live action, and which I felt was just like exposition after, like I wanted to see a lot more. Anyway, so like, but still, man, I'm blown away by the movie, and then visuals. Like at first, like the last film, I wasn't into it. It's hard to make something visually stunning when you're dealing with a lot of brown and black. You know what I mean?
Dune, Arrakis, the planet is boring to look at. Like there's a part where they tried the sunset and they're like, oh, it's so beautiful. I'm like, yeah, but that's like 10 minutes out of the day. The rest of the day it's just boring and drab.
But I did end up
rain and like clouds and stuff.
But I did still, I like visually, like the way things are composed, you know, like there, even the scene of him, like of training, essentially learning to their ways, and like go on your walkabout, like you go to that ridge, come back, and just, I don't know. I was sold on some of the, like the blurring, the depth of field stuff. Like, I don't know. I was just like, okay, cool. You're doing some cool stuff. And still I was into it. That I'm a deeply visual person, and I appreciate good visuals. That's how I know if a movie's writing and like story has got me, when like I just kind of don't care how ugly or not attractive a thing is. And that's kind of how I feel about the MCU in general. Like I think most of the designs in the MCU are kind of ugly to me, but I have fun with them.
I don't say that either to say that they didn't do a good job. I think that's a testament to them, like how good the movie looks considering what they had to work with Arrakis is a testament to what they do. I was thinking that like, I think like the first movie, a lot of it was the novelty of, oh, this is the first Dune movie since like 1984. How are they going to do it? It was cool to see their interpretation of the ornithopters, the spice crawlers, the worms, all that. And you see those things for the first time. And that kind of maybe props that up a little bit, because it's like, it's the novelty of seeing these things fresh through new eyes and new interpretation. And then now part 2 has to hook you with more than just that. Yeah. Does that make sense? You know what I mean?
No, totally. And I will say, like, you know, Dune, the past 2 incarnations for screen that worked, or that actually happened, and then the Jodorowsky one, which was like just more concept. They definitely went like much more wild with costumes. And I will say that part of me like wishes this thing did a little bit more of that. So like in costumes and character designs, like Dune, David Lynch with like the we didn't even get to see. Someone brought this up in chat. Like, didn't even get to see the Spacing Guild, which is like a trip because they've been using so much spice that basically not only are their brains affected, like their bodies are like not human anymore. They have evolved into this whole other thing. Weightlessness of space combined with spice makes them funky. But then, and then there's this, you know, just like even the still suits look cooler. Frankly, they look like, you know, sectars or whatever. And then even the BBC sci-fi one, everything was like colors, and all the Harkonnens were like bright red and black, and there was like a lot of like color language and fashion. And Jodorowsky, of course, was like crazy. But then there were moments in this, like Florence Pugh's outfit. That was dope.
I was gonna say her outfits were awesome. They were really cool.
Not totally.
It's interesting that they like her and then the Bene Gesserit. Their costumes were really cool, but for the most part, yeah, the rest of the people were pretty bland, but I felt like it worked. Like, and when I say, because I had mentioned before how I felt like the first movie was visually stunning, it's both a combination of like the look of the overall shots and just like the grandiosity, whatever the fuck the word is, of the shots. Totally. And then also just I love cinematography, so just, you know, the angles they would use, and same thing with this movie. But I think it worked because, like, you know, the Fremen are really one with the land, so like I'm not gonna expect them to have some crazy costumes. I think, you know, it's really, the still suits are really for like functional, like survival.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, so then I think with some of the other people, I think the problem is it's hard to take movies seriously sometimes if you have these crazy costumes. It depends. It has to be done in a certain way, and I think that if it's not done in the right way, which is very hard to do, it just doesn't work. It kind of takes you out of it. Like with the Hunger Games, the Capitals costumes are crazy, and they're supposed to be crazy. And I think it worked in the first movie. As the movies went on, it was just, I don't know, for some reason there was like some changes with them that I felt just kind of took me out of it a little bit. Yeah, but it's hard to get them right. So I would say maybe that's why they didn't want to go too crazy, but I felt like they could have done a little bit more as well with them.
Yeah, I think they do a good job with certain places, and like, so as we're talking, it's like when Jessica becomes a Reverend Mother, her whole outfit and the sort of like tattoos or sort of like writing on her face, loved all of that. Love the thing that she wrote in the desert. Like they kind of put her in that like there's a lot of cool designs. And then there's the other stuff that I'm not totally convinced by, like when they're doing their little like special ops attack on some of the spicing where they're like, they've got like helmets. Like it just didn't work for me, but I'm like visually, I wasn't like, ooh, I want a toy of that. But I was like, I'm cool with it in the story. But like the ornithopter, love it. I love that design. You know, I love the whatever you call them, I guess spice mining machines.
Sand crawler.
Yeah, maybe. And the big giant balloons that come get them, or dope.
Yeah.
The Emperor's ship and that giant silver, like that visual, gorgeous. Like you could see the reflection.
Yeah, the chrome sphere.
Yeah.
I got I'm thinking about it, and like the Harkonnen soldiers that were hunting them at the very beginning of the movie, like hunting them through the desert. I'm thinking back and I'm like, their armor makes me think of Tron.
Harvester.
Like,
yes,
I was getting Tron vibes from.
You're talking about the Emperor's troops, the Sardaukar?
No, whoever was hunting the Fremen through the desert at the very beginning of the movie.
Yeah. Okay. So those were the Harkonnens. Yes, but I thought them, but also, had that the guards, right, from Tron.
Is that just in general, just that general kind of aesthetic with the without the light the EL lighting going around it.
Yeah, I like the boxiness reminded me of the guards from the original Tron, and then the Sardaukar with their sort of like white outfits reminded me more of Tron Legacy stuff. I totally something about a full body suit. I guess it's very Tron.
And like glossy black.
Yeah. I know we should probably wrap up soon, but I will say, like, you talked about babies talking, embryo talking. I was fine with, because it's in the atmosphere. It reminded me of that Massive Attack video, Teardrop. I don't know if have you seen Teardrop?
I don't know.
After this, Google
I know Massive Attack.
Yeah, Google Massive Attack Teardrop, and you'll see an embryo singing a song. It's good.
Oh boy.
But I like that decision, and again, that's one of those other things. I know we'll quickly wrap up, but just that's another decision of like not having Alia. Like, I would have loved to see her, but at the same time, I kind of like the idea of her having conversations.
We saw her in the future,
and then that vision I thought was dope.
That was cool, because everyone was speculating who Anya Taylor-Joy was going to be, and that I think a lot of people were like, "Oh, I forget." They either were thinking, actually can't remember now who people were thinking, but that was one of them, was Aaliyah. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see.
That's a question I have now. I didn't think about it in the theater. This is something I didn't think about it in the theater. Didn't question it at all. Just accepted it and moved on. How was Jessica talking to the kid? Is that just something Bene Gesserit can do, or is that because she drank the water of life? It's a side effect of the ritual that she went through.
I think it's kind of a combination, I guess. But yes, it's that. They were both. Well, it's ultimately because they both drank the water. The what did she call it? The Chinese friend called it worm piss.
Oh, worm piss.
That, like, basically what that does for the Bene Gesserit is it allows them to go back to all their mitochondrial DNA, like all the female ancestors, and be able to, almost like the Avatar, be able to talk to like past generations, but only through the female line. And so effectively they were two reverend mothers who drank it at the same time. So the embryo could talk to her ancestor, which is her mom, who happens to still be alive. So they're like having this conversation while they could effectively talk to their grandmother or their great grandmother or even further beyond. And it's just this weird trippy thing.
Yeah, because
love it.
At least in the first book, the Bene Gesserit aren't telepathic. But yeah, clearly in the movie they are, especially the scene at the end with Jessica and the...
Yeah, I wasn't convinced that, I mean, they kind of showed it like that because of the talking. But like there's all sorts of stuff in the book about like talking with your hands, or they can have conversations and communicate by using code. Like, so maybe it's because I had the book, but I can totally see, if you didn't read any of that, I agree that it just seems like telepathy. So I just don't know. That did strike me as weird though. Like, why does
it struck me as telepathy too, because you see them and you see their face, but their mouth isn't moving, but you hear their voice and they're talking back and forth. So,
especially because they're across a room.
Yeah, they set it up as if it was like a telepathic communication.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there is a lot of communication in these movies that isn't verbal. And I saw something that Denny was saying, how he doesn't feel like you need a lot of what's the word? Dialogue to have a good story. And apparently there was some backlash to that, but I think it's true. Like, you can there's so many other ways to communicate with people that's not verbal, and I think he did a really good job of that.
Well, in these movies. Think that's knowing the medium. It kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier. Like, it's a visual medium, right? Like, I've watched like some of my whatever silent film, and you're like, okay, I can go with this, or just so that's what I mean by like a lot of the faces and a lot of the things that he does. I just think he does a good job of that. I didn't know that he said that, but that totally makes sense to me, and I see it in his work.
Mhm.
Rick was pointing out, like, he said, I wish they would get to Children of Dune and God Emperor of Dune someday. And I do too. Like, I want to see this. I don't know if they will. I don't know if Denis Villeneuve would continue with it. But in this world and in this incarnation, especially because of the changes they made, I'm kind of curious to see how they end up pulling it off. Because there are a lot of changes that actually could potentially mess up the narrative. That said, I'm always a wait and see kind of person, because I was the same in the first movie. I was like, dude, they didn't even show, like you pointed out, Fade. Like, that's weird.
Mhm.
How are they going to
Mhm.
set up that, all of these things that need to happen and parallel him and Paul?
Especially because they showed Raban. I was like,
Yeah.
it's interesting they showed Raban, but not Fade.
But then I watched the film and I was like, no, actually, this works. Yeah, maybe it would have
Yeah,
just
it still worked.
interrupted the dialogue. It would have interrupted the storytelling, maybe confused people. Like, who's this guy now? And like,
Yeah.
so I don't know. And then
I
even the
like.
stuff. Oh, good.
I was gonna say I like that sequence on. I'm assuming the Harkonnen home planet where like he essentially put him in a gladiatorial ring and he had to fight
80
like their
Prime.
captives. Yeah.
Yep.
I wanted to say
That
I
was a cool
feel
scene.
like I saw a rumor. I was reading about it. I feel like I read a rumor that Children of Dune is rumored to be a TV series.
Yeah, I saw
I
that
don't
too.
know.
Potential series.
I know that.
Yeah,
So
HBO.
I don't know, but I do know that HBO was developing a series that actually is just centered around the Bene Gesserit. And so that's been something that they've been talking about for a long time. And then for a while, then they were saying now it's going to be something they were developing that's separate from these Dune movies. And then they're like, because I think Denis was going to be involved. And so now supposedly it's still happening. So I don't know. But honestly, based on how these two films did, I'm sure that like Warner Brothers is like, hey, we have a potentially new franchise and probably will rethink some of this stuff. And I'm hoping they do end up going down and trying to finish the rest of the stuff, because it would be a trip to me to see this. And yeah, like, spoiler alert, because we're already talking spoilers for the movie and the books. At the end of the day, like, the kid becomes a giant worm and becomes the God Emperor and so like, I just want to see if they can pull this stuff off and if audiences will like go along with it or not. Like, it's literally depicted in some cases as a giant worm with a face on the side. So
you think they would actually do that?
They started the story at the end of the Children of Dune BBC sci-fi. I mean, yeah, technically it's a bunch of little makers that sort of fuse with him or something.
Oh.
Box office update. It's currently listed. Wikipedia has it at 198 million.
Is that international or just US?
It just says box office.
Domestic.
I assume that's the total, the worldwide. So let me ask you: how did the ending did the book end in the same place that the movie ended, with him like essentially declaring war on all the other houses by shooting them, trying to shoot them out of orbit, or at least giving the order to shoot them out of orbit?
No. Yeah, the way this ends is like, okay, we're going to war, and then we're all going to jump on a ship. Like, thanks for bringing that up, because that made me wonder, like, how does that even work? You're all going to go up in space and do what? Like, why would the Fremen be effective up there? Are they going to jump into the ships? So I don't know.
I was wondering that too. Because in the book, they fight. They have the
duel,
the
duel, and then Chani and Jessica are supposed to discuss terms with the Emperor.
Mm-hmm.
And, the Emperor agrees that Paul is going to marry Princess Irulan. And yeah, that's literally how it ends. And like the last line is Jessica saying, like, we're concubines, but we're like way beyond that, essentially. Like, we have a lot of power here. Because Chani is like, she's not Bene Gesserit, but she is like one of the like women leaders, like Brick was saying before in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I didn't get that. I didn't get any indication that she was anything but a soldier in the movie.
Yep.
Yeah.
And she
I think that's what they're going for.
Fucking the Messiah.
And that's what I mean. That's really like, yeah, that's going to be fun to me to kind of see where it goes. Because they're supposed to have a kid. And how does that work? Is she still pissed at him for doing this whole thing?
He finds out she's pregnant.
Yeah, or is she pregnant already? We don't know.
Mhm.
Because it.
Which you
Yeah,
think Paul would know
I would
since
too.
he knows everything in the moment.
Yeah.
So who knows? Yeah, it'll be interesting what they do with Aaliyah because clearly she's gonna have to come out now. Like didn't want her out in this one because 2 years goes by in the book, and we don't know about those 2 years honestly. So it was like we were talking about before. It was cool to see Paul's journey to become a Fremen in the movie because we didn't really get too much of that. Like we got when he rode the sandworm, but that was literally 2 years later. Like we didn't really get anything before that in the book. So, yeah.
So since I'm on GTFO, and oftentimes Kayla has a lot more innuendo, and two, you'll do what is it? Spoilers without context. As we sort of wrap up, allow me to just throw something out there that's both Randy and spoiler with no context. Just to throw this out there, Baron Harkonnen at one time was super physically fit, super handsome, gorgeous, charming, but the Bene Gesserit give him an STI, and things go awry from there.
That sucks.
Good times. And that's per like the prequel books.
Okay. Yeah,
they intentionally did that to him, and it's kind of wild when I read that, but good times.
Wow, interesting. I guess that makes sense now, because clearly it runs in the family that they are easily seduced. Which is just so funny in the movie when she was like, "Put your hand in the box." And I was like, "Which box?"
Yeah.
So good. There was definitely
play with my Gom Jabbar.
I felt like there when I was listening to the book twice over the last week. There's so many innuendos in there. I wanted to make a list of them. That's what they said. There was some in the movie, but there's a lot in the books that I'm just like, oh boy, I don't think someone could write these today and take it seriously. But yeah. Anyways, any final thoughts before we geek the F out of here? Will we recommend the film to people?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and so I'm always like hesitant just because like I'm such a dork for this stuff, and I was pleasantly surprised that I'm still a dork of these movies because part of me was like, oh, they're not going to be able to pull it off, but I love it and I appreciate it, so I would. But in talking with you two and kind of hearing other people's takes, even in the live chat and sort of watching it, I am kind of just curious. I wonder how it does resonate with people, because clearly some people really don't like it and like prefer some of the past stuff or like the books. So, but for me, I love it. I dig it, and I'm hoping they do more.
I think it is good to look at it as a separate entity from the books, because if you get too strung up on every little detail, then you're not gonna enjoy it. But I think like what we talked about, it's the changes that were made were the right ones. At least it like made more sense. It flowed better. There wasn't a talking cognizant 2-year-old that like ended up murdering the
still a risk. But yes.
Yeah, but you don't see the embryos like mouth moving or anything like that. Yeah. Anyways, lots of fun. Johnny, any other final thoughts?
No, not really.
As someone who hasn't read the book.
Nope. I enjoyed it. I
want to play that game.
Yeah. I should see if there's a digital version that we could get some people together and play. I liked it. Go watch the movie. It's good sci-fi. Like you said, I'm not trying to take anything away from the movie when I say I've seen this story before. I'm familiar with it. Like I may not have seen Dune or read Dune, but the beats and the basic, like when you distill the plot down to the bones, it's very familiar because it's 60 years old and inspired a ton of other sci-fi. So that says more for, and for them to make it and still have this movie to me be interesting, I think is a testament to everybody involved. So yeah, go watch it.
Totes.
I'm excited for this one to come out on digital so that I can stream the first one and this one back to back. Because I didn't rewatch. I should have rewatched the first one before I went to see this one, but I did not. I almost didn't have time to go see this. It was a week. I'm curious to see how they play as essentially one extended edition, because this picks up like in action basically. Like it doesn't really. It doesn't like do what a lot of sequels do, which is like reestablish all the characters and like get you used to it again. That's just like you watch the first movie. Here we go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, good luck with it. Here we go.
Part 2, not 2.
Yeah.
Like
it's not a sequel. Yeah. It's part 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I heard as I was coming out of the theater, someone was like, I just don't understand why they make movies like one book into 2-part movies. I'm like, you think you could fit both part 1 and part 2 in a movie?
It's a thick ass book.
Yeah. Thick with 2 C's.
That's one of the other things to remember too, is like when people complained about Tom Bombadil not being in Lord of the Rings movie, I'm like, you like Tom Bombadil? That those movies were not made for you if you already like Lord of the Rings. Yeah. They were made for the mass audiences.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing with this. This is made primarily for people who are not people like me, who are not familiar with Dune and don't know anything about it. It's a bonus for Dune fans that they get an adaptation that has varying levels of authenticity and is enjoyable, but it wasn't made for Dune fans.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes. For the most part. For the most part.
I mean, they take into account that Dune fans are going to watch it, but those are not the people that they're trying to draw in. I know what you mean.
Yeah, because they're not going to make enough money that way. There's no way.
No.
There's no way. Okay, what did you get, Brick?
Oh, nothing. I just wanted, we're toys. It got me to buy a bunch of McFarlane figures, so,
Oh, boy.
Yeah, we can put these folks in there.
There we go. Shove them in there. But yeah. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Before we geek the F out of here, Brick, do you want to let everyone know where they can find you, what you have going on?
You can find me in the beast of Shai Hulud, in the belly of Shai Hulud. No, you can find me here this Sunday. Actually, the next thing is going to be 4:30 p.m. Pacific. I do this thing called the News. It's not really a news, an acronym. It stands for the Needless Ephemera We Saw. And for the next 3 weeks, I'm hanging out with folks from the Collection Nexus, formerly Fig Bunker. So this weekend, I'm hanging out with Drew, Toy Box of Doom. And then next weekend, Jurassic Jesse. And then the weekend after that, it's Berserk. So it's going to be kind of cool. Talking toys, talking nerdy stuff. Sunday, 4:30 Pacific. And that's the main thing.
You're on top of that too. I gotta say, I remember like a week or 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, in the YouTube feed, it popped up. You had like 8 weeks worth of news already planned out, like premieres,
I'm trying to,
and ready to go.
Because I want to hang out with folks, and then I gotta I want to let people know what's coming up, and so.
Yeah.
Trying.
So they don't get the StreamYard link 5 minutes after the stream has started.
Oh, sometimes they still do that. But they know that it's coming. So, yeah. Fear is the mind killer. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone for geeking the F out with us. Make sure to smack that like, smack that subscribe, smack that bell icon. Go follow Brick. Check out his channel. I'm sure you probably already are, and he's, also streaming on his channel. That's awesome. But yeah, until next time, hope everyone. Oh, you can follow us at GTFO channel. Almost forgot that.
I thought you were going to say peace and long life, and I was getting ready to say live long and prosper, and I'm like, wait, that's the wrong show.
I almost did, and then I'm like, wait, I didn't talk about social media. I mostly post on, because it's me that's posting on Instagram.
It is.
So if you
it
want
was
to
me,
check
there
us
wouldn't
out
be any
there,
hosts.
yeah. Yeah, Trek Retrack every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 Eastern. Yeah.
Including tomorrow.
All right. Peace out, Cub Scouts.
Cool. I must not fear. Fear is
Fear
the
is
mind
the
killer.
mind
Fear is
killer.
little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear.
Wow, it completely cut him out. Come on.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.